So we finally have news on the release date of Poppy Playtime Chapter 3, and while it might be bad news for some, don't go cancelling Christmas just yet. Alongside this news, we also got a brand new gameplay trailer for the third installment of the game. Now there is so much to talk about with this trailer, but before I give my breakdown and analysis of this trailer, I do want to briefly address the release date news for Chapter 3. So if you haven't seen the announcement, unfortunately Chapter 3 has been delayed into 2024 by at least a few weeks. Now, this is disappointing. I know I was certainly looking forward to playing Chapter 3 before Christmas, and I'm sure many of you were as well. But at the same time, I do want to say that I would rather a game came out in the most polished state possible. Judging by this trailer, it does seem like Chapter 3 is far more ambitious than Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, and it makes sense that it's taken longer to develop. So while I understand it is a little bit frustrating that we can't play it just yet, it does seem by their wording that it's not going to be that long that we have to wait. It's only a few weeks into 2024. And considering we're halfway through December already, it really does seem like Chapter 3 is coming very, very soon. But with that news out of the way, we did get a really cool new trailer. There is so many little things in this trailer that you might have missed that I want to talk about. So the trailer begins with this television showing a snippet of the Smiling Critters cartoon. Now this is nothing we haven't already seen before, but at the end of it we get this emergency alert announcement. Now this date coincides with the same one in the VHS of Kissy Missy, and that makes total sense considering at the end of that VHS we did see what appeared to be the downfall of the factory, and this pretty much confirms that now. This seems like this was an alert sent out to the entire factory after the toys started going on a rampage. This would also confirm the timeline of Poppy Playtime though. Knowing that the game is set 10 years after the downfall of the factory, we can pretty confidently say that the game is set in 2005, meaning the game is set in our past. But the most interesting part of this scene is if you look really closely in the screen, you can see the reflection of something moving. Now this is kind of creepy, but if you brighten up the image, I do think that this is Catnap. You can see it's walking on all four legs, something that we'll see Catnap do at the end of this trailer. And if you look at the ears of all the Smiling Critters, this does seem to match Catnap's the best. None of them really have these pointy ears. I think the second closest would be Picky Piggy, but even those don't seem to be quite the same either. If you look really closely, I think you can see this part, which is the tail, so I'm pretty sure that this is Catnap. And judging by the fact that Mob haven't actually fully revealed Catnap yet, it makes sense that they would tease him here once again. But I also find it very interesting that Catnap does seem to be watching this television. Seems to show a curious side, which would make sense if he was Theodore. Now the second scene shows off what looks to be a giant dollhouse with a statue of Poppy. Now this implies that Poppy had an area in the playcare where she would visit the orphans, which makes total sense to me in my head. But the coolest thing about this is it kind of does show a parallel to where we found Poppy in Chapter 1. The area that you find Poppy in Chapter 1 does look like a dollhouse to me, and we even see a small dollhouse there too, which makes sense with the time that Poppy was released. The theme of dollhouses just really fits with her character and makes complete sense. However, it is really interesting that she does now have at least two different areas in the factory. Either Poppy was transported around the factory to where she needed to be, maybe she had even free roam of the factory, who knows, or this could be more evidence for the idea and theory that there are multiple Poppies. Something that I'm going to talk about later on in this gameplay trailer, there are some weird inconsistencies with the character of Poppy, and this is just even further fuel to that fire. Either way though, I do think we can confidently say that Poppy would spend time with the orphans down here, which could add to our theories and her character. In this next scene, we get a closer look at one of the bedrooms in the playcare. Now the most obvious thing in this scene to me is that this place looks in a complete state of disrepair. This is something that we saw all the way through Chapter 1 and especially in Chapter 2, but knowing that this factory has been abandoned for 10 years with no one to maintain it and these multiple dolls roaming around it, it makes sense that this place is falling to bits. But what I do think this scene is trying to imply is that there are going to be many more dangers than just Catnap in Chapter 3. Not only do we pretty much have confirmation in this trailer there are multiple living dolls that we're going to have to contend with, I think we're also going to have to watch where we step. Many of these scenes show the floor being crumbling, we see these loose wires, so I think electricity is going to be something that we have to look out for as well. And that actually ties back into the story as well. We know that Theodore was electrocuted before he was saved, and it looks like we're going to have to be careful that we don't meet that same fate as well. Now, you can't really make out too much in this bedroom. It seems to be just a lot of mess, really. But one thing I do want to point out is if you look at the ceiling, you can see these catnap scratch marks here. We see these scratch marks everywhere that catnap goes. Now, why I think this is really interesting, I really do think this is hinting what I said in my previous video, that I do think catnap is going to pop out of some of these holes, maybe in the floor, maybe in the ceiling. Very much like the alien from Alien Isolation, we're going to have to really be careful that we don't get grabbed by catnap as we go past these hidey holes. I think this is going to be part of his mechanic. He's going to pop up out of nowhere, and it's going to be something that we have to deal with, but we also have to deal with these environmental hazards as well. Now, we do see another one of these backpacks, and I have theorized previously that these could be the new collectibles in Chapter 3. We'll have to see, but it's one there for you to look at as well. Now, this scene appears to be the way that we're going to find the gas mask in Chapter 3, and this is something that we've theorized for a long time now, and we have definite confirmation in this trailer that we will be using the gas mask to avoid the Poppy gas. But if you look really carefully on the left, you can see what looks like a go-kart or some form of ride, and I wonder if that is going to be something that we're going to have to interact with in the 3rd chapter. This could be our new Barry the Basket moment, except it's going to be Carl the Cart. Calling it now, Carl the Cart. Now, in this scene, we see all the smiling critters lined up. Now, what's really interesting about this is that they don't seem to be moving. We know that Bobby Bearhug at least is alive. We see him crawling down the corridor in the CCTV, but why are they all just sat here not moving? Is this part of their gimmick? Is this a Chucky style thing where they're going to be pretending to be asleep, but then they come back alive? Or is it going to be something else? But they do seem to be hanging out together, which also kind of confirms that they are a friend group, which again makes sense if they were all orphans. But either way, we see all of the other toys around them being dead and them being sat down here as a group together. And I do think this is really tying into the faction idea of this factory. There were different factions that popped up, and the smiling critters were just one of those factions. Again, perhaps they're all followers of 1006 and everyone else are heretics. We can also see what looks like these letters here, which we saw in the images as well. And Mob have been very careful not to fully show off those letters, so I'm interested to see what they say. We get a poster of catnap, which makes total sense. We know that they used catnap to send the orphans to sleep, and this is just more Playtime Co. propaganda, nothing really out of the ordinary. But then we get this monstrosity. Now, this is something we saw the silhouette of in the trailer for Chapter 3, and seeing it in person in the flesh is very interesting. There is so much to talk about with this one. Where do I begin? Okay, let's start off with the skeleton at the front. This, I believe, is the very first human skeleton or human remains we've even seen in the entire game, which is crazy considering that it appears that everybody is being murdered in this factory. So actually seeing a human skeleton is kind of a big step up, but if you look at it, it looks like it is tied. You can see that its hands look like they are bound together, something that we will see later on in the trailer too, massively implying that catnap doesn't just kill people, but he binds them and tortures them as well. Again, the devs did say Chapter 3 is going to get dark, and I think we can see the direction they're going with that one. But looking at the dolls that are here, you can see several that are really interesting. First of all, you can see the PJ Poggapillar. Now, this could be the PJ Poggapillar from Chapter 2. It's entirely possible that somebody got to PJ and killed him after the events of the 2nd chapter. We also see Mommy Longlegs, which makes total sense. We know that Mommy Longlegs was killed by us, and we saw that 1006 took them, so that makes total sense too. The one that I'm not so sure about is this Huggy here. Now, this has been a huge debate pretty much since the end of Chapter 2. I've been talking about this for so long. I am still convinced that Huggy Wuggy is going to return in Poppy Playtime. It makes so much sense, so much so that I think I'm going to make a whole video on that one because I have so much evidence. But this one does appear to be a large Huggy. Now, you might be saying, hey, Tericho, wait, this is the Huggy from Chapter 1, and this is confirming that Huggy will not return. I'm going to argue against that one, though. I think there's actually a logical explanation for it, and I'm going to talk about that. So, if you look at this Huggy, he doesn't look like the full-sized Huggy from Chapter 1. If this is the full-size PJ, which it appears to be, Huggy should be bigger than that. Huggy was very, very tall. I actually think this is a medium-sized Huggy. Now, we know there are several different sizes of Huggy. We know there were the little ones. We see them in Project Playtime. We know that there are medium ones that we see in Chapter 2 in the minigame. And we also know that there is at least one bigger body version of Huggy. Now, if you look at this one, it's possible that this is the bigger body version of Huggy. However, it's also possible that this was the one we saw in this VHS of Bron. because if you remember, there was at least one Kissy and one Huggy in this room, and they seemed very, very different to the Huggy and the Kissy that we've seen. This Kissy seems to be very normal, very calm, and this Kissy seems to be very animalistic and very feral. They are very, very different, and this Kissy does appear to be smaller, so I think this one is this Huggy, not the Huggy from chapter 1. Now you might just be saying, hey, no, this is definitely Cope, you're wrong, this is Huggy from chapter 1, Huggy's never coming back. Then why do we see this Huggy just a few scenes later in the very same trailer? This one looks like it's missing its eyes, which could make sense. If Huggy fell all of that way, it makes sense that he would be damaged, and he also looks really, really unhinged. So I don't know, it's possible that this is the Huggy from chapter 1, but it's also possible that it's this Huggy. At this point, we really don't know how many Huggies there are, but I am still convinced that Huggy Wuggy, the original Huggy Wuggy 1170, is going to return. Keep an eye out for a future video on that one. The other really interesting one on this one is the Bron though. This is something that I have been excited for so long now. We still haven't seen a living Bron yet. And we've seen in the trailers there definitely is at least one living Bron. We also know that the small living Bron was a thing with Thomas, but the Bron here is looking directly into the camera. Now this one's clearly dead, which is fine, but it's looking directly into the camera. And I don't know if that's just a coincidence or if this is another hint that we are going to see a living Bron. I said ages ago that I thought we were going to see a living Bron in chapter 3, and I'm still kind of hoping that we will. I know we're going to see the smiling critters. I'm pretty convinced we're going to see Huggy, but I would love to see a living Bron in chapter 3 as well. And this is just my theory, but it would be pretty cool. Now, if you look at all of the others, there are a bunch of critters here. We see one that looks like Crafty Corn, and you can see a bunch of different ones. Now, it is interesting that there are smiling critters here too. Now, I wonder if these were just normal toys, just normal plushies that weren't alive, or whether these were others that were brought to life, but for whatever reason they died. I really don't know. It does seem like 1006 doesn't attack anybody that follows him. Again, this whole worshipping thing. So maybe these were ones that didn't agree with 1006, or maybe they were just unliving ones. We don't know yet, but a lot of people have been asking, what does this mean? And judging by where this is, I think this is just a shrine. I think this is a shrine. It's 1006 showing his dominance. It doesn't seem to be a body like I originally theorized, because if you look at it, it looks like some sort of metalwork and they're placed around it. So it looks more like a decorative item, more like a warning, more like something like a serial killer's, trophy case more than anything else. Then we get possibly the most interesting thing we've seen in a Poppy Playtime trailer yet. And this is a character that appears to be Dog Day. Judging by the thumbnail, I think it is Dog Day, tied up and talking. Now, what's really weird about this is we do see a living Dog Day later, and this does seem to be a bigger one than the tiny Dog Day. So this is implying that there were 3 different Dog Days, a small, a medium, and a large, which again makes kind of sense with the Huggy thing going on as well. But this one, for some reason, has been tied up. Now, I'm guessing that this was because this one doesn't follow 1006, and my guess is because this is an ex-staff member. Now, we know that the factory went into downfall, and we know that many people were transferred into dolls, some orphans, and some staff. We've definitely had confirmation now that some staff were transferred into dolls. So, that one was described as being voluntary, and I do have a theory that that may not have been the case, but if we say that that was the case, it's entirely possible that even more staff volunteered to have themselves put into doll bodies, and perhaps they even did that to save themselves from the downfall of the factory, thinking that if they were a doll that they wouldn't get killed. And now we know, of course, that's not necessarily true. But I do find it interesting that there are definitely several Dog Days in chapter 3. I really don't think these are the same one, because if they are, why would he be talking to us and bound, and in another scene he's chasing us? It doesn't seem to make sense. If we set him free, then why is he chasing us? I'm not entirely sure. Now we get a very blink and you'll miss it confirmation that we are going to use multiple grab packs. We see that we have the blue and the green one here, and then we switch it out to be the purple. This is the first time that we've had multiple grab pack hands to choose from, or should I say more than 2 to choose from. And I think that's really interesting that we're going to be using the green one for the electric puzzles. We see that those are being upgraded. They're going to be a bit more complicated in the chapter 3, but we're also going to be using these jumping puzzles, which is kind of cool because we did have the swinging jumping puzzles in chapter 2, but they were very basic. So seeing these purple jump pads is kind of cool. But it also looks very different from all the other grab pack hands. This one looks far more experimental. I don't know if this is something that was an experiment or if this is something that maybe 1006 cooked up or somebody else cooked up. I don't know, but it does look very different and I wonder why. We then get this scene where some creature is walking past the screen. Now, I actually originally thought this was going to be Huggy or Kissy, but if you look slowly, you can see that it has 4 legs. And again, I think this is once again our good friend Catnap. I don't know of any other giant creatures with 4 legs that we've seen yet, so my money is going to be on Catnap for that one, and you can see a Catnap poster in the background as well. So I think that's just another cheeky nod that Catnap is roaming these halls. Now, this scene is so interesting for a number of ways. We finally get confirmation that Kissy is friendly towards the player. You can see that Poppy and Kissy seem to be working together, something that people have already speculated before, but this kind of seems to imply again that I said in my previous theory that Poppy was the one that orchestrated the downfall of Mommy. We know that Kissy was the one that let us through the gate in chapter 2 to get to Mommy, and we know that we finally dispatched Mommy. So it seems like Mommy and Poppy were enemies, and by extension, Kissy and Mommy were enemies too. Now, if you look really closely at Poppy, there's a couple of really interesting details I want to talk about. First is her arm. I can't quite tell if she's holding something or if her arm is missing. I can't quite tell if this is her arm. It's been damaged. We do know that in chapter 2 at the end, she did get grabbed or something. She definitely was in shock, so something was happening to her. So I'm wondering if we're going to have to save her again at the beginning of chapter 3, or is she holding something? Which if she is holding something, I can't quite tell what it is. But if you look at her eyes are once again different. Now, these eyes are something that I've talked about in previous theories that could be a clue to Poppy's personality. We know that she has 2 very different personality styles. She has a very friendly, very welcoming side, very cheeky, playful side, kind of like Huggy did. And then she has her more sinister, more secretive side where she gets a little bit more mysterious, shall we say. And her eyes seem to change. At the end of chapter 2, they were huge, and now they've gone back to being small again. So I'm wondering if this is Mob giving us yet another clue that when her eyes change, her personality has changed. Now, this could be because there are multiple people inhabiting the same doll body, or it could just be psychological trauma. It could be a number of different things, but either way, the eyes are a clue. We will be, at least in some part, working with Poppy and Kissy in chapter 3. So that theory has been pretty much confirmed. We get a very brief close-up of this phone. If you don't know, this phone is from Project Playtime. We got a bunch of updates in that game on this one. This is something that has been teased. There is this other faction in the factory that's trying to help us, or so they say. They seem to be working against the Playtime Co staff. So seeing this phone here is a good confirmation that we're going to get a continuation of that story, and that's very cool. Now we get our first look at the gas mask being used. Now, if you look at this corridor, it looks exactly like the corridor where we found Poppy in chapter 1. Again, she was also encased in a case full of red gas, but I think this is the dollhouse that we saw at the previous part of this trailer. I think this is where we're going to be going in there at some point, and it's going to be full. For some reason, it's going to be full of this red gas, and we're going to have to use this gas mask to get through it. Now, I don't know why it's going to be full of this red gas, but I'm really interested to get in there and find out. And again, one final confirmation that we will be using the gas mask, and I'm wondering if it's going to have limited time to use it, who knows, but it's going to be part of the exploration. And as I said earlier, the environmental hazards of this chapter are going to be a big deal. In this scene, we can very briefly see the words, "Peace awaits those who believe." Now, this is all just part of this whole cult thing. This is nothing out of the ordinary at this point. It seems like these people worship 1006 as almost like a god or a cult leader. In fact, the word god is mentioned in this trailer as well, I believe. So it is really interesting that we're getting all of this everywhere. And I do wonder if this is Catnap that writes this, because we see a lot of those near the scratch marks that he leaves. So it does kind of imply that Catnap still has some level of intelligence, which I'm wondering if we're going to have a conversation with him like we did with Mommy in chapter 2. And then finally, we get the scene. We get one last tease of Catnap. We can see just how big Catnap is, taking up this full corridor on 4 legs, which is also kind of interesting because I didn't think the first trailer that we got really implied that, but seeing it here, it is clear that he's going to be running around on 4 legs, which means it's probably quite fast and probably quite scary. But yeah, I'm so excited to see just how creepy Catnap is in chapter 3. But yeah, this is my off-the-cuff analysis of this trailer. I have not slept in days. Funnily enough, I think I need Catnap. Hashtag need a catnap to fall asleep. But yeah, probably missed other stuff. Let me know in the comments below if I missed anything else. There's so much in this trailer. I'm so excited for chapter 3, and I hope you'll all join me when I play through it and I find all the secrets in hopefully January. I don't know. But anyway, thank you very much for watching. If you liked the vid, leave it a like, subscribe if you want to. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.